Six Flags is an interesting company. For my money, way more interesting than Disney. That's why I talk about Six Flags on this channel, and Disney not so much. They're interesting because they aren't perfect. Far from it. They have a tumultuous history, and to this day, they still seem to be trying to figure it out. There have been a lot of mishaps along the way, and today, let's dig them up and put them on display. These are Six Flags' biggest mistakes. Let's do this by going from park to park, and then talking about the chain-wide mistakes that affected everyone. There aren't that many parks that have individual mistakes, so some of you may be left off the hook in that sense, but there are plenty of chain-wide mistakes to go around. Let's start with Magic Mountain and go straight to the worst coaster ever built, Green Lantern First Flight. On paper, this looks good. It's a thrill ride on a tiny plot of land. It was something they could shove into Gotham City, adding another ride to the area. And keep in mind, this was 4 years before the first SNS free spin, so that wasn't an option. Green Lantern had a bad habit of coming back to the station with the cars still upside down. They couldn't flip the cars back without shutting the ride down, so their solution was to make it flip less. And that completely ruined the ride experience as Intamin designed it. It just hurt. The G-forces were all over the place. It put pressure where pressure shouldn't go. Six Flags didn't do their homework, and this is not Intamin's finest work either. Another one for Magic Mountain. They completely neutered Colossus. When this opened in 1978, it was the tallest and fastest wooden coaster in the world, and it had some serious airtime. At the end of its first season, there was a fatality where a rider was ejected. The ride was closed for 10 months in 1979, and several of the hills were reprofiled, making it less extreme. The last straw came in 1991, when the Double Down was leveled off and turned into a brake run. Until it was RMC'd in 2014, you could still see the Double Down track underneath that brake run. Colossus was still a fun ride, but these changes seemed unnecessary. It seems like maybe Colossus was a little before its time. One more for Magic Mountain. When Revolution opened, it was the first modern coaster with a vertical loop, and like most Schwarzkopf loopers in the 1970s, the trains only had lap bars. In 1992, the park added over-the-shoulder restraints so riders couldn't stand up. It was like this all the way until 2016 when they gave it new trains with just a lap bar. It's too bad the park felt like they needed to do this. I'm guessing the original lap bars were too loose and some people were able to stand up. I never tried it, so I don't know, but I do remember that old lap bar being pretty weak. Still, the horse collars were awful. It caused headbanging. It was so much more restrictive and it made it almost unrideable. The new trains have newer lap bars where you just can't stand up on a whim, and I'm thankful for it. Moving up the coast to Discovery Kingdom, how about Harley Quinn Crazy Coaster? This has to be among the saddest additions in Six Flags history. It was at the park for 2 seasons. It opened late for its 2018 debut, and once it was open, it was never really open. I was lucky enough to ride it a few months before it closed for good, and I only say lucky because I got to experience it. Not lucky because it was a good ride. It was a miserable experience. Rough, repetitive. If the dive loop was awkward and janky the first time, you can bet it's going to be the same the next 12 times. Six Flags is going back to Skyline to get their single rail family coasters, but nobody else ever bought a vertical Skywarp. Jumping across the country to Six Flags New England, let's talk about Goliath. This was a giant inverted boomerang, a model I actually enjoy. This was removed from Magic Mountain in 2011, shipped to New England for the 2012 season, and everything should have worked out great, except for one detail. The park was concerned about the trains. These were staggered with 2 seats on the inside up front, and then 2 seats on the outside in the back. It's kind of like the B&M Hyper train you'll find on Diamondback. They thought this would be confusing and hurt capacity, so they asked Premier Rides to build a train with 4 across seating. Sounds good, right? Well, these trains were abysmal. They ran so rough on the track, so if they were concerned about capacity, these actually worked out great. People didn't want to ride a coaster that painful. Aftershock at Silverwood was relocated also, but that kept the original trains, and for the last 14 years, everyone has figured out how to ride it and it's awesome. Goliath wasn't, and now it's in the scrapyard. Down the East Coast at Great Adventure, and I want to get serious about this one. There was a terrible accident in 1984 at their Haunted Castle attraction. There was a fire that killed 8 people that were trapped inside. And by all accounts, it seems like more could have been done so this wouldn't happen. Six Flags was even indicted for aggravated manslaughter for having such an unsafe attraction, even ignoring warnings from safety consultants, especially around the installation of smoke alarms and sprinklers. The jury found them not guilty, but you would hope that this incident would at least cause Six Flags to change their safety protocols, and not risk having something like this happen again. Staying at Great Adventure, they were one of the parks that fell for the Togo trap in the 90s. After Ultra Twister was removed, they thought another Togo was the answer. This was Viper, and it did operate for 10 seasons, but it had major maintenance issues. It was down a lot, it was rough, and everyone seemed to hate it. I don't know what other options Six Flags had when this was built in 1995, but I think literally anything else would have been a better choice. They replaced this with El Toro, and that was a great choice. Even though the last 2 years, I think nothing has caused the company a bigger headache. Now for Kentucky Kingdom, and this park has always been a weird one for Six Flags. The park is owned by the Kentucky State Fair Board. Six Flags was just leasing it, and while the park was going through bankruptcy in 2009, they wanted to restructure their lease and the board said no. Six Flags thought their only choice was to close the park down. Apparently, the board did indicate they were open to a new deal. Six Flags apparently wanted to pay them by giving them a cut of their revenue, but they shut it down anyway. I think their mistake was leaving this park for dead. This has been successful ever since it was revived, and it was even sold to Hershey in 2021. This would have been a great park for Six Flags to keep in their portfolio. Heading north to Ohio, we have Geauga Lake, or Six Flags Ohio, or Six Flags Worlds of Adventure. Their obvious mistake here was growing the park beyond its means. This is a small regional park with a loyal local fan base, and Six Flags turned it into the world's largest park almost overnight. They added 4 new coasters in 2000, and in 2001 they acquired SeaWorld Ohio on the other side of the lake, combining the two parks into Worlds of Adventure. You hate to knock a chain for investing too much, but this seems to be one case where it happened. This park and this area was not meant to be a mega park, but Six Flags didn't recognize this, and they had to sell the park to Cedar Fair in 2004. The last park-specific one is down at Six Flags New Orleans, and this one should be pretty obvious. This park opened as Jazzland in 2000. Six Flags bought the park in 2002, adding a Batman clone in 2003, also moved their Vekoma Looper from Fiesta, Texas to this park, so it did seem like they were willing to build it up at least a little bit. But after Hurricane Katrina, the park was too badly damaged to reopen. It's not really their fault. I'm not saying the park was a bad purchase, but it was still a mistake. Maybe you can blame them for buying a park in a city that sits below sea level, using a levee system that was completely inadequate. Six Flags was buying every park they could get their hands on at the time, and that leads me to the first chain-wide mistake, buying so many parks in the 90s and early 2000s. This was really an issue when Premier Parks bought the chain from Time Warner. They couldn't stop themselves. Warner Brothers Movie World in Germany, SeaWorld Ohio, La Ronde, and if you look back to the years just before buying Six Flags, Premier Parks bought Geauga Lake, Darien Lake, Elitch Gardens, Riverside Park, now Six Flags New England, Great Escape, Kentucky Kingdom, Marine World, and the Wallaby Parks in Europe. They didn't keep a lot of these parks for even 10 years, selling them off when their finances started to crack. Compared to Cedar Fair, who was very measured with their acquisitions, Six Flags' fire sale between 2004 and 2007 shows that this was not a great business model. Before Premier Parks, Six Flags employed an interesting way to save money, the ride rotation program. This started in the mid-80s and lasted into the early 90s, and then it was abandoned. They would build portable coasters at the parks, and then every 2 to 3 years, they would move that coaster to a new park. I guess they figured it was cheaper to take apart and rebuild coasters all the time, rather than build a whole new one. As we entered the early 90s, rides were starting to get bigger and better, and most of the ride rotation coasters suddenly froze in place, almost like a game of coaster musical chairs. And when the music stopped, the parks just kept their prize. Flashback landed at Magic Mountain, Lava Bora over Texas, Batman the Escape at Astroworld. I don't know if this ever worked for the chain, but the fact that they discontinued it in less than 10 years, that makes me think it was probably a mistake. Now, for more modern mistakes, starting with putting VR on their most popular coasters. I like the idea of VR. I'm actually going to run off some of the good decisions Six Flags has made at the end of this video, and that's one of them. But why would you put VR on your most popular coasters? This added another element to the coaster experience, the movements of the coaster being synced up to the movements on the VR headset. And for small coasters that never had a line, it made sense. But then you had parks like Great America using it on Raging Bull, New England using it on Superman the Ride, and America using it on Superman Ride of Steel. The VR headset slowed down dispatching so much. For a ride that already pulls a 2-hour line, why add a gimmick that makes it longer? It made no sense, and the VR did not stay on those big coasters after the first year. A few years back, Six Flags started using biometric scanners for the season passes. This was their new way of verifying the person using the pass was the person the pass belonged to. In the past, this would be solved by a picture, and in the present, this is solved by a picture. But for a short amount of time, they were using fingerprints. From my experience, it did not work great. It never worked for kids. Everyone would be standing there for about a minute and a half trying to get the thing to read your finger, and the line to get into the park just crawled. The chain was even sued in 2019, a class action suit in Illinois that was settled for $36 million. I understand the reasoning behind it. The fingerprint is way more secure than a picture, but they should have known it would be a problem legally, and it would slow down the entry process. Ever since I can remember, Six Flags has been trying to turn itself into a family chain. The Magic Mountain Extreme Park nickname didn't last long. Once money became tight, they were looking for the deepest pockets they could find, and that was from parents bringing their kids to the park. From a short-sighted financial standpoint, I can see why they would go after the guests with the most money. But what ends up happening is the park tries to become something it's not. It can't be Disney better than Disney, and it ends up being appealing to nobody. It's like putting a square peg in a round hole. These parks are filled with huge thrilling rides, and just a small collection of family rides, and they don't seem to want to invest what it would take to make the full transformation. They are great at being a park that teenagers and young adults enjoy, and those demographics spend the least amount of money in the parks. Maybe there isn't a great answer here, but if Six Flags wants to become a go-to park for families, they're gonna have to try a lot harder. Another recent move was to do away with memberships, now promoting the season pass. This makes no sense to me whatsoever. Maybe they wanted to get people off the legacy memberships, and when they introduced new memberships last summer, that seemed to be the case. But a month later, those memberships were gone and they went back to the season pass, and now I'm confused. Memberships seem perfect, not just for Six Flags, but for any business. It's monthly income. It never expires. You have to actively try to get rid of it, and let's face it, people aren't that proactive. Instead, Six Flags wants the season pass, which can be paid off all at once, and it expires. Now, those not so proactive people have to make an effort to renew their pass instead of cancel it. I can't explain this one, and it seems like a mistake to me. We will see if Six Flags comes back to memberships in the future. Speaking of passes, their last mistake was increasing the prices before increasing their quality. Salim Basul came in as CEO in 2021, and he said he didn't want the parks to be a hangout for teenagers anymore. He wanted to attract fewer guests into the park, but have them spend more money once they were in there, offering a more premium experience. But without seeing the changes that would give us a more premium experience, why would people pay more? It seems like they would see the price increase, think back to their discount chain experience from before, and find somewhere else to spend their money. Given Six Flags quarterly reports last year, that seems to be what happened. Based on my experience at Magic Mountain over the last few months of the year, I honestly have never seen the park that dysfunctional. Several major rides were closed for weeks or months at a time. Restaurants and refill stations seem indefinitely closed. The Cheeto popcorn stand finally opening, only to find they don't have Cheeto popcorn. In 2022, I saw nothing at Six Flags parks that would justify a higher price. Six Flags should have shown their hand before raising their prices, and I think it was a big mistake not to. Okay, now for the good side of Six Flags. Let's celebrate their good decisions. I mentioned how bad it was to put VR on their most popular coasters. Well, I think it was an awesome idea to put it on their smaller coasters. Revolution at Magic Mountain is a great example. Steam and Demon at Great Escape is also one where this works. Mind Eraser at Six Flags New England may have been painful, but a good idea. I think this gives life to a coaster that needs it. I'm also pretty sure that to promote their VR product, Samsung gave these headsets to Six Flags. So, a free way to get people into the park and enjoy a dead attraction. That was a good idea. Six Flags also flooded their parks with Zamperla Giga Discoveries. These are high capacity, have a small footprint, and are more thrilling than 80% of the coasters out there. They're also hugely popular. I have never seen one of these without a big line, and it's not because of bad capacity. This is one clone that I can get behind. Six Flags also took advantage of the International Worker Program. This was a great way to fill in the employment gaps, and having worked at Magic Mountain and being a supervisor there, I don't know what we would have done without the internationals. This is something that a park guest would not notice on the surface, but behind the scenes, it does really make the park run. Back in the early 90s, Six Flags was willing to give B&M a chance on their first projects. Great America got the first B&M in Iron Wolf, then the first invert in Batman the Ride. Great America acted as the showroom floor for these models, and B&M took off from there. Kudos to Six Flags for taking the chance and being first. Finally, fast forward 20 years and you can say the same about RMC. This was even more risky than B&M, as converting wooden coasters into steel hybrids was something completely new. RMC needed someone to take a chance with them, and Six Flags needed something affordable when they came out of bankruptcy. It was a match made in heaven, and the two never stopped doing business, even as other chains and independent parks came calling. That's a wrap on this video. Let me know if you have any thoughts on these mistakes, and if you have any other mistakes that could have made this video. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, and if you're new here and love coasters, please give me a sub. Also, check out my links below for my Discord server, and my second channel where I post copyright-free off-road footage, and my baseball channel if you also happen to love baseball. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.